morning and welcome everyone to worship at North Hills. Good to be together today, right? Is it good? We have late breaking news in this era of cell phones and instant pictures sent to us. We have photographic evidence that Pastor Terry and Diana are up in Oregon getting ready for the wedding ceremony of Julie Caney and Don. And so that's happening today. So they are up in the beautiful area of Oregon. So we are missing them here, but happy for that occasion up there. And let's see if we can do okay here this morning as we worship God and focus our attention on His Word. And I invite you to look with me to 2 Corinthians. And we'll look at chapter 4, the first 6 verses. Second Corinthians chapter 4, and we'll read verses 1 through 6. Therefore, since it is by God's mercy that we are engaged in this ministry, we do not lose heart. We have renounced the shameful things that one hides. We refuse to practice cunning or to falsify God's word. But by the open statement of the truth, we commend ourselves in the conscience of everyone in the sight of God. And even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For we do not proclaim ourselves. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. I'm indebted to a young 18-year-old German teenager who asked a question a long time ago that's important to me and I think important to us. In fact, I think we're all indebted to him. A modern-day person who looked at the Word of God and was touched and moved by it. At 18 years old, he began to ask this question, and it became the question that was on his mind and heart for the rest of his short life. What is the church? What is the church? Now, like many of us, he had grown up around church. He had grown up in a home where state church was in operation, but there was also a devout spirituality from his mother and from those who cared for him. There was a scientific mindset that encouraged questioning and good answers, and a certain amount of scientific skepticism, all kind of mingled together in his home. And when he decided, while still a young boy, to pursue a life dedicated to the study of theology, his family wasn't all that excited. But study it he did, this very bright teenager, beginning his doctoral program at the age of 18. What is the church? He asked. And by the time he completed his doctoral dissertation 3 years later, at age 21, Dietrich Bonhoeffer had some idea of what the church was. He saw it as something rising above the limits of denomination, of culture, of race. He saw the Church of Jesus Christ as elevated above those things and crossing all those boundaries, unbound by tradition, unyoked from personal comfort, preference. Here's what he said. It is Christ himself existing as church community. That's how he boiled it down. He would say to us today that as the church, we are Christ, living in the flesh in our human world. He saw the church community as a section of humanity in which Christ has really taken form. You catch some of the vividness of his language. Of course, he wrote and spoke in German. We've translated his writings and his thoughts. But the clarity, the penetrating nature of his vision of who the church is, what the church is. We are Christ in human, everyday, walking around form. What we are as the church and who Christ is are inseparable. We are him in the concrete places of human life. And so this great thought, we see it not arising from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, but arising from the Scriptures, and echoed by him in this very powerful way. This is what we want to look at today and be captured in a fresh way by this idea of what the church is. How does this happen? Where who God is, who the living Christ is, and who we are become joined, become fused together in what we call church. I think it's helpful if we look at a frequent symbol or metaphor that's used in the Bible to teach us, and it's in this passage by Paul in 2 Corinthians today. That is light. Light captures what's happening. Because the light is God, Jesus Christ, right? But light also is us. Jesus is called the true light who enters the world from John 1. But he said also, without any qualification, you are the light of the world. And Paul in this passage brings the two together. His light and ours, and says this: God has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. The blazing glory of the eternal God shining on and through our life together. One light. That's a favorite term that's used by Jesus and the prophets and the apostles to talk about God's life and ours. It's light. Remember from Isaiah 60, verses 1 through 3. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has come upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples, but the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. And notice, it is the glory of the Lord that comes upon us, but it's called your light. Arise, shine. Isaiah says, and later Jesus would, let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. It's the radiance of God himself shining from within us and among us. That's church. So how is it that we as the church shine with light? We want to talk about a couple of things today that arise from this passage from Paul and from the Scriptures. We proclaim, we do not proclaim ourselves. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord and ourselves for Jesus' sake. The light is our message. And our message is not just words. Our message is our life and his. Our light is what we proclaim with our words and our lives. It is what we can call our confession. That's an old term for stands that the church has taken down through the centuries. The church has made various confessions down through time. It's basically a stand that is taken. And so we proclaim, the first pillar of our stand is Jesus Christ as Lord, and second, ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. It's very interesting because in the same passage, Paul says, we do not proclaim ourselves. We are not focused on ourselves in this. And yet we do proclaim ourselves. We proclaim Jesus Christ, and we proclaim ourselves as slaves for Jesus' sake. This is compelling, life-changing stuff if we allow it to shine full and bright in our lives. More than just words, it's what we stand for. It's what we live for. And at different times in church history, when the church has needed to take a stand, it does so with a confession. Here's where we are. Here's what we believe. Here's what we are enacting in our world. And so, in the days when this German young man was reflecting on so deeply on what the church is, it was called the Confessing Church. So, the life of God and our life are brought together and united under this term or this symbol of light. Of course, He is the light. He is the glory. He shines upon us and into our lives. And then that light radiates from us. So as light, that is who we are. But as soon as we say light, we have to recognize in the Scriptures and in our experience, there is darkness. Light is inevitably confronted by darkness. The light shines in the darkness, John said, and the darkness did not overcome it. And Jesus said, if the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? For it is the God who said, let light shine out of darkness, who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. And Paul would say, there are those who do not believe, who prefer the darkness to the light, and so on. Let's consider this for a moment as we think about who we are. What is the church? Who are we? What is our identity? We are described as light. And we are invited, we are directed and compelled to arise and shine because your light has come. But as soon as we want to shine our light, we recognize the borders of shadow and darkness resist the light. And this has always been true, and in the case of young Bonhoeffer, we know of some of the darkness that began to come over the Germany of the 1930s. And so he, as someone who was convicted by what the church was and how the church should act, began to be convicted and troubled by what was happening. After the humiliation of World War I and the attempts to have a democratic republic imposed upon Germany, Adolf Hitler emerged as a galvanizing leader to restore Germany's greatness. He was to be der Führer, the leader. No more of this democratic republic. We need a galvanizing leader to restore Germany to its glory. So he was elected chancellor, as we know, in January of 1933. Hitler took the title of Der Führer to himself, but just 2 days later, 2 days after Hitler became chancellor of Germany, Dietrich Bonhoeffer went on the radio in a prepared radio broadcast titled The Führer Principle. And in his radio broadcast, he directly challenged the notion that any human being would be described as der Führer. He talked about the lordship of Christ, and that this Führer principle would be opposed to the lordship of Jesus Christ and could lead to idolatry. It's quite a read to read some of the words that he spoke in that broadcast, and to realize this was just 2 days after Hitler was elected chancellor. That radio broadcast was cut off by the Nazis before it could be completed. We have the complete text, but it was never delivered over the radio. And so Bonhoeffer then, he's in his 20s, begins to challenge what he sees as the darkness. And of course the challenge is always to the church, I believe, that if we accept the designation as light, we also have to have vision to see what is darkness, right? And there's a call of God to us, not only to let our light shine, but to declare what is darkness. And don't call darkness light and light darkness. But with that comes sacrifice. In the spirit of Paul, who said, we proclaim ourselves as slaves for Jesus' sake. We give our lives. We sacrifice ourselves to let the light shine and drive back the darkness. Well, there was an advancing darkness in 1930s Germany, as we're well aware. But during that time, there was a church. And in Germany, there was a state church that was organized as they were more regional churches, including the Lutheran Church and others, and the Catholic Church was also prominent in Germany. And they became organized under what was called the German Evangelical Church. It was a state church that became increasingly Nazi-led. And today, if we see some of the images from that time, we shudder to think of the Church of Christ joining with such darkness. We've got a couple of these startling images here. Does that give you a bit of a chill? Look in the faces, and you see that the church leaders are in some sort of conflict, it appears, even as they give the Sieg Heil salute. They don't look happy. And so the German Evangelical Church sort of came to terms with Hitler. And the strongest portion of what became stronger was what was called the German Church, which had an anti-Semitic statement in it. And there were those then, and Bonhoeffer was among the leading voices there, who began to challenge not only Hitler, but challenge the church. And with the voice of people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Karl Barth, they advanced from a position what they call the confessing church. Here's where we stand. We are standing against state-ruled churches. The church must maintain its integrity under Christ. Christ is Lord. And so there were voices of the confessing church, and even the confessing church was criticized by both Barth and Bonhoeffer for not being bold enough in challenging what was happening, particularly as the final solution was advanced against the Jews. Bonhoeffer's conviction was that the church must shine forth its truth not just with words, but with action taken in the very heart of human life. Here's one of his statements. We are not simply to bandage the wounds of victims beneath the wheels of injustice. We are to drive a spoke into the wheel itself. Think about that. That may challenge our understanding of how a church is to function in society. But he says that as part of the light that we radiate from Jesus Christ himself, we not only relieve suffering, but as the wheels of injustice turn, we seek to drive a spoke into the wheel itself. That is, challenge and derail the injustice. And of course, so in Bonhoeffer's own story, he became increasingly involved with the resistance to the Nazis and to Hitler, and ultimately it cost him his life. Whatever the darkness is of our world, our light must penetrate it. That is who we are as the church. We can ask ourselves, where do we see darkness advancing in our world? Is hate still alive? We may be, chagrined to realize that the hate of the 1930s isn't so different from the hate of the 21st century. Is humanity being devalued and degraded? Are we sensitive to the wrong things? For example, our own status and recognition, we may be acutely sensitive to that. And insensitive to the wrong things, such as violence and oppressive. If the light that is within you becomes darkness, how great is the darkness, Jesus said. Arise, shine, for your light has come. And so if we take that seriously, that we are light, we are his light, then our light must penetrate the darkness wherever we find it. We must penetrate beyond hate and division. We need a lavish and prodigal love that floods across all barriers between people. All barriers between us are false anyway, aren't they? We must penetrate beyond those barriers. We penetrate beyond tradition. We need responsiveness to the burning issues of our day and to God's call to us in the midst of these issues. We can't just simply maintain what we are used to. The light shines in the darkness. It must penetrate beyond our own comfort. We need our own sacrifice. Sacrifice of our own ease and our own convenience to push back the darkness. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord and ourselves as slaves for Jesus' sake. Our light must penetrate beyond the fads and trends of our day. There are things that are popular or that capture the common interest. We need to be aware of the current concerns of our world, but also have an anchor in timeless, enduring truths that have stirred those who have come before us. Light. And so there are two pillars upon which we stand as a church. The radiant life of Jesus Christ, received personally and communally, he has shone in our hearts. And the second pillar, giving our lives for Jesus' sake. It's interesting to consider, in the case of Bonhoeffer, what the sources of light were that shone in his life. I see it as a remarkable providence that God brought so many details together in his life that brought light. Why wasn't he just another indifferent state church member? What lit the fire in him? What made his light shine bright? Well, in his home he had a mother who was devout, that's to be sure. But her Christianity would be considered more traditional probably in that day. But it's interesting to discover that the children in the family were largely raised by two governesses who had come from the Moravian community of Herrnhut. And they were descendants of John Huss. And they brought this vibrant, personal, spirit-filled Christianity into the Bonhoeffer home. The Bonhoeffers were scientists. They were skeptics. Benign toward religion. His father certainly was, a psychiatrist, and highly regarded, and tolerated the religious practices within the home. His mother was devout and regular in the practice of her faith. But there was this personal, dynamic faith that was taught by these two governesses as they read from the scriptures and they taught the children to pray. I have to believe that that's some of the light that shone on him. He began his studies of the Bible and the church, and certainly Karl Barth with his theology that the scriptures are not just outdated documents that are interesting to study from a strictly literary point of view. He saw the scriptures as the living word, so that behind those words there is a living Christ who is present. And when we read the word, we encounter God. Light. Light was shining on his path. And the Bible itself, this was not necessarily practiced by his siblings or by others commonly in the day, but Dietrich Bonhoeffer began that practice of daily digesting the Word, and he had a daily practice of praying and meditating and receiving the Word that he later encouraged in others. There's another source of light, and if we think of the darkness closing in Germany, he became one of the leading voices in this illegal church, the confessing church. It was not the state church. It was not considered valid. It was tolerated for a period of time. And in 1935, he opened a training seminary. Think of it. If you could take your concept of what church is supposed to be, who we are, and develop a training school, a seminary, to help build leaders in that church, help people capture that vision, how would you do it? How would you organize your seminary? What would you put in the curriculum and in the training? And he had that opportunity. And for 2 years, there was this community in Finkenwalde, where he had this seminary that was supported completely by the community. You have to realize that in those days, to not receive state funding, to not have any income from the state, required a lot of faith. And so the pastors that came to that seminary and became part of that church did so with the support of the community at their goodwill. And that became the community of Finkenwalde. There was another source of light that shone on Bonhoeffer's life. Caught him quite by surprise. When he was in his 20s, he was 24 years old and could not be ordained until he was 25. And so took a trip to the United States for some postdoctoral work at Union Theological Seminary in New York. And this was to be like a postdoctoral study sort of trip. But there he met an African-American student who said, why don't you come with me to church one of these days? And so he did. And Bonhoeffer attended the Abyssinian Baptist Church in New York, a very large church. In fact, at that time, I think it was the largest church in the United States, pastored by Adam Clayton Powell. And he was absolutely stunned. He was stunned by the reality of the presence of Jesus expressed and experienced by the people there. He also recognized that in 1930s America, They were largely on the fringes of society in a similar way as the Jews were regarded in Germany. And he quickly joined those two concepts. And he experienced there the reality of God who is present, who speaks to us now in our situation, who speaks light into existence in the middle of darkness. He saw it there in that congregation. The light shone in the darkness, and the darkness could not overcome it. And he was touched by it, profoundly moved, so that the bright, academic, precocious young man became a changed young man who had encountered God in a different way than he had known in the past. And so he gathered together recordings of the spirituals that were being sung in the black churches. And he brought them to Germany. And so you saw in Finkenwalde, again, if you're going to design a seminary where you make church happen, he made sure that he had the spirituals there for the way that they evoked the nearness of God in our reality. Two truths. The life of Jesus Christ is real among us, and our life is given to him. We proclaim ourselves as slaves for Jesus' sake. Light that came upon him. And I just wonder, as I think about each one of your stories, what is the way that God has shown his light on you? You may have experienced darkness in one way or the other. Suffering, setback, frustration. You may find yourself in a bored and apathetic place with life right now, disillusioned with life, finding it unsatisfying. Whatever the experience may be, God has shown his light on your life. And as you gather together with us, his light shines among us as well. This is the Bible truth about the church. This is who we are. Not a gathering of people to just consider ideas of long ago, but where the living Christ is with us and animates our very existence. He shines our light, his light, on us and in us and through us. God's light has shone on you. And I wonder about the different ways that has happened. What has been your story where God has brought his light to you? Two truths are proclaimed and are confessed by the Church of Jesus Christ. The reality and presence of the resurrected living Christ and the reality of our life that is fully his. And we experience both of them in community. If you taste this, there's nothing like it. But one of the compelling things about our Celebrate Recovery Fellowship, it struck me early on, is that this is church. That's what's happening here. We're calling it recovery. We're dealing with people's hurts, hang-ups, and habits. But it's church where we're coming together. We are genuine about real life with each other. And the light of Jesus Christ, the higher power who is Jesus Christ our Lord, shines in that fellowship. It shines in the darkness, whatever darkness is in our lives, and the darkness cannot overcome it. That's who we are, church. And so we proclaim those two realities. We don't proclaim ourselves, Paul says, and yet we do proclaim ourselves. In a sense, maybe more accurately, we reclaim ourselves. We find who we are in the presence of Christ. We don't stand detached, voicing tired opinions, religious or otherwise, opinions that cost us nothing. As slaves of Jesus Christ, for the sake of our world, we give our lives for what we confess. So what have you given yourself to? Is it worth the sacrifice of your life? Or have you really ever given yourself fully to anything? The confessing church is never simply an organization or denomination. It cuts across all barriers that would attempt to confine it. It's a community bonded together by immediate engagement with the living God and fueled and propelled by the Spirit of God into the descending darkness of the world. And if you can't yet see the darkness, pray that God's Spirit will open your eyes and mine. It's a community that walks and lives and acts in the light in a supernatural fellowship. What has God enabled you to see? Where are the boundaries of darkness and where is the light? Does the Spirit of God stir you as you see humanity degraded or suffering or confused or misguided? Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you.